I disabuse my writers of thinking of memoir like a kind of novel. It's highly creative, but it's distinct and different from the novel in very important ways. Again, first-person nonfiction. Let's talk about what you all have read and heard about memoir. What you know about memoir. Let's hear from some of you in the crowd. Let's talk about this. There are two people with microphones, so don't be shy. We'll be sending people around. We can open up the conversation. It's a good opportunity for you all before I go into a more formal introduction of who I am. Let's hear from some people. What do you know about memoir? What have you heard about memoir? Yes, right here in the black t-shirt in the front.
Sure.
Thanks for the microphone help.
Sure. Basically, with the memoir, since it's nonfiction, you can be creative with it, but since it's told in your perspective, the narration is in your perspective, so you don't always get other people's opinion or knowledge in the memoir.
Well, this is wonderful. This is fantastic. This is why we open up the conversation. What's your name?
Jessica.
Jessica.
Jessica
actually brought up a vital and essential part of storytelling in general. Much of the work we do in a memoir class is about storytelling in general. Storytelling more broadly, it applies also much of it to memoir. Perspective, something we work on. We'll see, time allowing, tonight if we do an exercise on perspective. What are the pitfalls, right, of a first-person driven story, the narrator, protagonist, you, both the protagonist back there in the action of the past and the narrator spinning the story in the present. You are the dominant force in that memoir. That's, again, first-person nonfiction. First-person storytelling, distinct, very distinct, that double self. We'll talk more about that. But Jessica is talking about the memoir being just your perspective, your memories. You hear this discussed a lot. Isn't it my time to shine? Isn't memoir my memories, however subjective and faulty and flawed and biased my perspective might be? This is the form for me to assert my perspective. And yes, it is I dominant, but that's precisely why the savvy memoirist wants to deliberately include those other perspectives you're talking about, Jessica. Why would a memoirist ever want to rely on just your own memories? It's very interesting when you hear this debated still, because you will in universities, other writing schools, in the ivory towers of literature across the country. This essential nature of first-person storytelling, you'll hear people talk about memory that way too. Well, this is just my memories. This is just the way I remember it. Isn't that okay? Even if it's very flawed? Well, no, not exactly. There's more work for the memoirist to do. There's more work for the memoirist to do first-person nonfiction, everybody. Nonfiction means all of the brilliant tools and techniques of journalism at your disposal, along with those creative elements. Jessica, you were talking about that. It's a creative telling of a true story. That's absolutely right. Let's talk more about this. Perspective, vital. A lot of great memoirs get the opinions and the perspectives of family members, loved ones, witnesses, fellow sufferers, fellow travelers, co-workers from back in the day. Wait a second, Teach, do you mean go talk to these people, call them up, send emails? Yes, that's you working as the journalist. That's one hat that the memoirist wears. Let's hear from some others. What's some stuff you know about memoir? These could be book titles, the things that you've read, or concepts that you understand about first-person storytelling. Yes, what's your name?
Veritas.
Your name is Veritas.
Tell me, I had
That's powerful.
my hand raised to your first question.
Not everybody gets called upon.
At least two people get.
What is your question, Veritas?
I want to know. I've always despised all forms of narcissism, and to me, I'm skeptical about the narcissistic aspect.
She has long abhorred all forms of narcissism. Brilliant. I am in complete concurrence. There's a great article that I often assign to my memoir classes. It's called "The Meek Shall Inherit the Memoir." The meek shall inherit the memoir. Wait a second. I thought memoir was my chance to shine. I thought memoir was my chance to win the argument. It can be. But it can also be a lot of other things, to share the full wealth of your life, the other people who shared it with you, the other perspectives that even might cast your version into doubt, even. Yes, indeed. Narcissism is one of the major pitfalls of first-person nonfiction. It's great you brought this up. What are the dangers of telling a story about oneself? We all know this very instinctively, and all of that instinctive knowledge, what happens at a party when someone is talking to you and not asking you any questions?
Hi.
Wait a second, how does the memoirist ask the reader questions? Literally, sometimes literally asking the reader questions, or creating implicit questions for the reader, involving the reader in your story. So sharing the wealth of the opportunity that memoir affords the writer, bringing in other perspectives, and yes, warding against narcissism, warding against the first person taking over too dominantly. It's fantastic, these lessons. You are going to dominate the story anyway. Don't worry about that. That's going to happen quite naturally. It's driven by first-person nonfiction. It all comes back to you, but you definitely want to get beyond yourself. I don't know if there are any NBA fans. Basketball teaches us something here. The great Greg Popovich, who coached numerous championship teams from the San Antonio Spurs, they asked him, what kind of players do you choose? How do you keep creating championship teams? He said, we choose people who have gotten over themselves. There's a lot of brilliance in that for memoir. How do I mean that vis-a-vis memoir, where a person has gotten over herself, someone has gotten over himself? That means a lot of good things, but let's kick it back to you, everybody. I want to talk to more people. Who else? Let's talk about some memoir titles. Maybe some of you have taken memoir classes even. Actually, Sophie and others, I see you out there. Yes, great. What's your name?
My name's Tanya.
Tanya, thanks for coming.
I was just reminded of that book, A Million Little Pieces. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. That's a great teaching example. James Frey, A Million Little Pieces. Oprah turned him into a million little pieces. Thank you for laughing. I'll be here until 8:30. Yeah, A Million Little Pieces, James Frey. Some of you, who else is familiar with that book? Just raise your hands, a bunch of you. Classic memoir, right? Bestseller, international success, right? Wrong on many accounts. Why? Well, that brings us to the interesting territory of what is true and what is not. And I'm not on a soapbox in the southwest corner of Hyde Park, London right now. I will not proselytize, but I do take my writing classes and my own writing. I love fiction, but I always also gravitate back to nonfiction like many of you. It's what brings you here. Maybe you read novels, you watch movies, but you also like the power of first person. Personal essays, memoir, historical witness, redemption tales, all of those beautiful kinds of storytelling. There's a big difference between the realm of fiction and the realm of nonfiction. And memoir, as I said at the top of this, Good Writers, is that memoir is not a kind of novel. It is supposed to be in pursuit of the truth. Wait a second, what are you talking about? How dare you say such a thing? We have the realm of fiction for other pursuits without those constraints. But the beautiful realm of fact-finding, truth-seeking. William Zinsser, great New York City teacher, God rest his soul, talked about memoir as a search mechanism, an investigative tool, a way to reconcile past selves with the current identity. Memoir is, it has a lot of power when writers start to squander that power by bringing in too many fictive techniques. What do I mean by fictive techniques? That's a great question, actually, class. That's a long conversation. James Frey made up parts of his memoir which were really instrumental to the book. He notoriously said it was 85% true. But I give you as a really good proof of what was going on, he and his agent tried to sell that book as a novel, which was more appropriate because he had invented and fabricated. If any of you find yourself doing that, guess what? Bravo, you're writing autobiographical fiction, which is a very popular and saleable form. It's a wonderful form of literature, what they call autofiction or autobiographical fiction. Many of my students, some of them, they plainly admit at the beginning of our memoir courses sometimes, I hear everything you're saying, teach, good, but I'm taking my personal experiences and I'm actually recasting them as fiction. Wonderful. Memoir is still narrative. It still can be scene-driven. You still want to recreate the past with settings coming alive. We're going to do some writing in a moment. This also mimics, everybody, what we do in our coursework. Gotham Writers Workshop, been around since 1993. Very proud to be here. My name actually is Cullen Thomas. I like to think part of why my parents named me Cullen is after this park. The park is named for William Cullen Bryant, who was a newspaper man, an abolitionist, a progressive thinker, but even better, if I dare say so, he was a writer. First, a romantic poet. Does poetry have a place in memoir? Yes, hell yes, said the poet. Absolutely it does. Can my memoirs be lyrical? Yes, they can, for sure. Some of the most beautiful memoirs read like dreams. You've read them. You know what I'm talking about. Beautiful writing. Lush literary memoirs. William Cullen Bryant was also a journalist. Another great example for us. Wait a second, teach. Is a memoirist a journalist? Yes, in part. Why would you not look to avail yourself of all of the wonderful tools and techniques that are at your disposal in the realm of journalism, along with all of those great fictive techniques of character, setting, scene making. And then finally, everyone, thank you for coming here tonight. William Cullen Bryant was an editor. I encourage you all to think of yourselves when you come to classes like this, writing workshops, especially nonfiction, to think of yourselves really working on 3 tracks: as a writer, as an editor, and as a reader. Those are all symbiotic. Maybe I could just say those are symbiotic. I didn't need the word all right there to self-edit. Thank you for laughing. Extra credit for that woman in the corner laughing. So, class, you're my class for the evening. Let's do some writing. I'd like to hear